Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Wheel of Time recaps here at RHAP. We know scripted TV. I'm your host, Taran Armstrong, here to talk about episode 5 in a spoiler-free fashion with my co-host, Grace Leeder. How you doing, Grace?
I'm doing well. We're gonna do this in a spoiler fashion, right?
Well, spoiler-free.
Spoiler free for yeah. We won't spoil the rest of the series, but we're gonna spoil what happened.
Episode 5. We will spoil episode 5. We will not spoil episode 5. Yes, what I meant was that we will not spoil future episodes or anything along those lines.
Yes, of course.
But yes, we're going to talk about episode 5. And after episode 4, so this is a lot of sort of like, can it carry the torch, Grace? And
yeah, I feel that. I feel like it had it aired, like last week. The title of our YouTube episode was, as you know, from the mouth of Rich Filiberto, was like best episode of fantasy TV ever. Like that's sort of like what we were like lauding onto the show to some degree. And so, arguably it's going to be, it's a very high bar for the next episode that comes after it. And so I think you just hope that it's like, pretty good. And I think it was like pretty good. Like, I think we're like, that's sort of my take on it. So I'm excited to chat with you about it. We're in the world of dreams, Taran.
Tell Aran Riod. I've never actually said that out loud.
Yeah.
So yes, what we are going to do here, we're going to talk about episode 5. Really just like very minimal information from books in terms of talking about the episode. And then later in the podcast, we will delineate specifically. We will then be talking about book spoilery stuff. Even that will not be too deep spoilery, but more so just like the relevance to what we're seeing in the episode 2 book context. That is the plan. So let's talk about the episode. So yeah, I mean, I was a big fan of episode 4. Obviously, it was very good episode. Episode 5, I think, was not bad. I think that there's a couple things that happened to me specifically. One is that my expectations were a little bit higher than they normally are. And the other is that like there were a couple of things that this episode did that are like the same things that I don't like about some of the previous seasons and how they went about things. So I think those two things combined led to a little bit of a frustrating episode for me. That said, still loved it, still didn't want the episode to end, still wanted to watch the next episode immediately. Like none of that has changed. I'm really enjoying the show, but I did have a few nits to pick with this episode.
Well, then I'm just intrigued. You want to like, should we start there? Like, what are
we can go straight there.
Specifically the stuff that you feel like is like, it's reflective of the things that they were doing that, in the first seasons that you didn't love is what I'm.
Yeah. It's got to do with Perrin. I feel like every time Perrin has been in a White Cloak encampment, just visually, it has not looked great. Just I had a little bit of an issue with this. So this is one of many storylines in this episode. There's a whole bunch of threads going on in this one. One of them is Perrin is going to go and rescue Matt's mom and sisters. Matt told Perrin in the beginning of the season, hey, like look out for them. He's like, of course.
Yep.
Ooh. He's gonna go and rescue them from the White Cloak camp. And there's a few, basically most of my complaints, maybe all of my complaints, come from this particular storyline, which is unfortunate because this is one of my favorites in the books. But not in like the grand storytelling sense, more so in some of the specifics of how this went down. So you have Alana doing the misty stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then they go into the encampment and it's like a ghost town. It's like, okay, well, it's fine. Nobody can see any. You're sneaking in. Okay, I get that. They send the sisters out. They find Matt's mom. And then it's still like, where is everyone? Like I know that they went off to fight Alana, but like that was like 10 dudes at most. This is supposed to be a whole kind of like army of people. Um, and then they come out of the tent and there's like 3 of them. And they start yelling at each other and have a whole big fight, and it's still just 3 of them. Nobody else comes. Like it just feels so empty. I was frustrated at this. And this to me is very reminiscent of other battle scenes, other times when Perrin has been in the White Cloak camp and they've really struggled to shoot wolves. And just like it doesn't leave me with a lot of hope that they'll ever be able to properly pull off like the big action set pieces, which have always been my biggest issue with the show.
Yeah, so I think potentially where I think that maybe things are happening. We talked about this after the first episodes dropped, Taran, and I talked about how I think the costuming of the show is quite incredible, and it does feel like they have a lot of money, and yet it does feel like every once in a while you see something you're like, I don't know. And in episode 1, that was the CGI. It was a CGI in for as much as the first battle scene in episode 1 worked really well. There's also some stuff in there where if you're like really watching it, like, like scene by scene, you can see the seams. And I do think that I do feel like when the show, what's kind of unfortunate, I don't know if this is true or not. It does feel like they choose where to allocate a lot of money. And I think that like last week's episode, I think like honestly, probably like the CGI stuff that they had to do to pull off like Rand in Ridian and all of the scenes, we could talk about the hair and prosthetics, but I actually think like for the most part, it's like it wasn't even that it's not even that bad. It's just like I think noticeable when it's not like I think that there's a level to which the show can get to that the show is not getting to every single time. And so that's a little bit unfortunate because I don't know what the solution to that is other than that the show gets more money for things or has to like it, they there's a way in which they're both kind of sometimes I felt like this with other shows where I feel like sometimes they're too beholden to the books, knowing that um they have to make choices because of budget or the just the realities of making it as a TV show. And I think that this is a fair one to say, if you're going to set this thing up of like it's going to be so dangerous for Perrin to go in and like rescue Matt's family, then you have to make sure that there's a way in which you articulate that in a way that it actually feels dangerous and not that it's like, oh, oops, actually it was probably just like not even that dangerous for him to go in
Well,
the
I think
first
the way
place.
that they've conveyed danger is just that everyone gets stabbed all the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is, that's fair, I guess. But yeah, it just the parent plot here felt a little undercooked to me in general. It wasn't like the set piece was unfortunate. It reminded me, I might have said this before, but like I remember I never really watched a lot of like the show Charmed back in the day, but I remember
Mhm.
being on a lot and seeing that like on that show, and probably it was the same thing with like Buffy or whatever, but Buffy did it better for sure. But like they'd just always fight like demons in the same alley. And it would
Right.
always be like
Right.
them
Right.
with like a couple of demons, and then they'd punch and kick, and then they'd be
Yeah.
like, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's just like I get that vibe from shows sometimes. This happened in The Witcher too, sometimes where it's just like there's just not enough people around.
Yeah.
And it's just too focused of a thing. I think the show is so good with environment
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
often that when it's not, it really stands out to me. And for this scene, I think I'm being extremely nitpicky. I think my issue is that I've had a problem with their bigger, more important ones in the past. And if this is still the level at which they're like pulling off these kinds of scenes, it does make me worry for some of those bigger, more epic scenes in the future. But I will hold that worry. My other issue with this plot line, and I've been kind of like I've heard the complaints about Alana and Maxim or Warder. I've heard the complaints, and I've been like, nah, I think this makes sense. I think this is fine. I did personally find the argument between her and her warder, and then him leaving and then coming back and saving her, was it was
Mm.
kind of amateur. Like, this was very melodrama that just did not feel like it fit in the world of this TV show. This felt like something from Charmed. This felt like it dipped too down deep into the CW,
Mm.
and I just don't think it belonged here. I think there's still some relevance to this, and there's some importance to this, surely, but it ate up a lot of time, and it just did not work for me.
Yeah, I think that that's fair. It's interesting to me that there is sort of, this is a, what I get interested in by fantasy and sci-fi and these like genre heavy shows is like there theoretically is something in here that I would have like I never really, have seen explored in television before, which is if the idea is like so we set up that like, Aes Sedai have these warders and then that bond is like super super powerful, and what happens if somebody has two warders and then one of those warders dies? Like there's something inherently I think interesting about exploring that dynamic. I think part of sometimes I think the Wheel of Time book suffers from this as well, in that there are so many characters, the ensemble is so large that it feels when we go a whole episode, maybe where one character gets such limited content and then you spend a lot of time on something else. It's almost like, and then when it doesn't work, you're like, okay, like there's so much we could be doing, like, and instead we're kind of here. And I do often feel bad being like, am I not super interested in Alana and Maxim? Like, just honestly, yeah. But then I just and there's just other places I would rather be more than I'm there. And it's too bad because the like what I was saying is that there like is an interesting thing here that we could explore in this world of a very like a very female centric driven show. This idea of like her getting to have two warders and one of those warders dying, and that to me is like interesting. And then the show, I think you're right, just kind of did go sort of, you know, very tropey. It didn't really
I
explore any
Yeah,
of the stuff that I think could be interesting about this. So yeah,
exactly. I think you nailed it. I think that, like, why, like, the reason I was like, I'm totally on board with this, was because of this notion of like, when one of a trio dies and there's this bond, like, who owns that grief? Like, that is an
yeah,
interesting concept to explore.
yeah,
um but this, like, back and forth about like, well, you're trying to do grand things and I only care about revenge killing Leandrin, and I'm gonna leave, but I'm also not gonna leave, I'm gonna be right back in 2 seconds. And it was just like, what is this, like, mini arc? What is the point of this? And it doesn't have any relevance to, like, the bond, really. Like, they talk about the bond, but it doesn't really. This could have been ripped from anything, and especially the lines that he was giving. Oh, like, I'm not just gonna sit back and watch you do, like, I heard
yep.
every single word before he said
It,
it, and I was
it's
like, oof.
it's also the most like rote way to get to these themes I've been talking about that I feel like are super strong in this show and in the text, is which is the things you have to give up in order to like fulfill the duty or your responsibility. And what's more interesting, I think a more interesting take on this is not that he's like, well, I'm leaving. It's more like, I can't believe I have to stay. I can't like, and so the idea that he would actually have to stay and does this thing rather than him getting
Yeah,
like, the dynamics of this show are sort of like the way in which I think that this scene sort of plays out is more it doesn't feel like it comes from the themes of this show, which is
I
would be yeah. Mhm.
I think you again nailed it. I think that this would have been so much more interesting as a plot line if it wasn't him having a big dramatic speech and storming off and then coming back and saving her, but instead was him just being like, I'm stuck.
Yeah.
I can't leave, because I'm bonded to you and you are dedicated to this mission. And, like, I can't walk away from that, like, physically or
Yeah.
mentally.
Yeah.
And here, and the interesting part about this, the thing I did like about this, of course, was her talking about why she's here, finally getting an explanation for
Yeah.
why she's here. She's here because some powerful people here. it's
Yeah. Mhm.
the dragon, Perrin with his eyes, Matt, whatever's going on with him, and then like the most powerful channelers we've seen in ages. Like I bet there's more powerful people here, and then oh, wouldn't you know it? Like maybe one of Matt's sisters just blew away White Cloak. So that I liked that part of it, but yeah, the other thing just it just took me out of the whole show. And then and really like when he came back to save her too, it was just like, yeah, okay.
Well, and then she gets wounded. Isn't it more interesting if she gets like if there's something about like the fact that he actually like it's his duty to do it. He's stuck there, and then she still gets wounded, and it's like maybe his heart wasn't in it while he was there, but instead it was like no, it's because he like I just think I agree. Yeah, there's not to like rewrite the show for them, but if you're not playing into there's this thing I've said a bunch to you. I think I've said on a bunch of podcasts, but I remember hearing this writer being like the thing that a lot of authors miss is the fact that every chapter of your book, every moment in your book should be playing into a theme that you are trying to tell in your story. And when a scene doesn't do it, it can be quite glaring. So I feel like this like is like missing the ideas of many of the themes that work really well in other scenes in this episode. So that we could be spending time with.
Yes. Now, what I will say is that again, I like the reason for her being there. I also like Fail's inclusion, and she's kicking ass, and that's fun. This was I hesitate to say I liked it, but what that dude did to Matt's mom, oof, like that definitely hurt. And I would say hurt in a way because this is no spoilers whatsoever really here, but this is a different thing than what happens in the books. But what happens in the books is a similar thing, and I think that what they did here was more effective than what they did in the books to like really to affect me as a viewer, as a consumer of this story. And I am like, like I said, more impacted by this than the result of what happened in the books. And so I also felt like there wasn't quite enough Perrin in here to like really feel that. I assume we're gonna get more of that in the next episode, but it definitely worked well. And then to pair that, and this is what I thought was excellent, to pair that with later in the episode, Egwene visiting Matt's dream, and him in his dreams is, having his mom tell him that she's proud of him and that he's taking care of them, was brutal. For her, it was this like, oh, cutesy little scene. Oh, this is what Matt wants to be, not realizing just how devastating it is that he's never actually going to be able to get that from his mom.
Guess what, Taran? It's because Natty dying fits incredibly well into the themes of the show, which is about duty and responsibility and what you do. And in this role, she is the mom of these girls who protects them, who protects the fact that it was actually one of them that channeled and not her. And so I think you're right. I think it worked. It worked really well. It is brutal. It is like said, and then, like there's a way in which sometimes I feel like am I being too, this could happen in another show and they don't have the vast ensemble of women in this in a show, and you're like, oh, we're just gonna kill the mom, like that feels brutal. But I feel like because the show is buoyed so much by that larger representation, that like this can be actually an incredibly impactful thing, not just for what it means for like Matt's sisters moving forward, but also what it means for Matt, and also Perrin, who is bearing the responsibility of literally coming back to, like, he literally was like, I'm going back because Two Rivers needs help, and so when he comes and finds her dead, like he's gonna feel like he wasn't able to do what he was able to do, which is come back and save the Two Rivers folk. It's good.
Okay, so that was the Two Rivers stuff. Unless there's anything else to touch on there.
Well, can we jump to sort of like on the journey to Tenchiko? I do feel like this is where I think that my like thing about the show is I think that they are like I think that they just like, for as much as it's like, oh yeah, Amazon has a bunch of money and should give them, and probably this budget is huge, but also it's an epic fantasy show. And I guess they have to figure this out of how to do this stuff better. But then I do see a thing like the Sea Folk trip, and I'm like, oh, this looked super cool. This I thought actually looked quite amazing. I think that we talked about this at some point over these weeks of like, I think for my money, one of the things that I'm loving the most, I've talked about how I'm not like I am a visual person, and so I have a tough time reading something and then imagining it myself. And so getting to see the way that magic actually works, as they've decided how it looks, I think is super cool. And this trip to Chanchico, I think is quite effective, especially the scene where they come out and see that they are using the one power to speed their travel.
I thought this was great. I was not the like I was never the biggest fan of this sort of storyline in the book of
Yeah.
like Matt and his accompaniment of like Elaine and Nynaeve and you know them going about and doing things. It felt like sort of a side quest in the books that didn't always feel like it mattered a lot. And so I think the way that they're doing it in the show is better, and it's more focused, and it's again it's touching on character beats that are really interesting, and at the same time exploring the world in an interesting way. I really like this stuff here, especially like for instance, Nynaeve is seasick. This is true to the
Yeah.
books.
Uh-huh.
She just can't handle being on the boat. They go up to the deck. They're not supposed to, but immediately the sea folk are like, "Hey, your feet are wrong. Like you
Mhm.
need to essentially surrender to the waves, or like stop trying to fight it, right?" And then eventually later on, you know, she's like, "You're not channeling." She's like, "I can't control it. It's not
Yeah.
about control. It's about surrendering to this like grander thing." And the way that they tie the seasickness into Nynaeve's block, and the way that that the power works, especially for women in this story, is perfect because that is exactly how it's described. That you are supposed to surrender to this thing, and that is notably different than how men are supposed to try to channel. But for Nynaeve, who is somebody who's just wants to take control, makes a lot of sense. And then you see that reflected again in her dream later on, that Egwene visits, that she is with her daughter from the Arches.
Yeah.
I love that they're not just letting that go,
Mhm.
because it shouldn't be let go. That
Yep.
was devastating to her. But they're showing off the moment of like when you're the wisdom in Emmons Field and you're talking about that very concept, and that she needs to sort of like bring herself back to that so that she can relearn this idea of like surrender. And it all just works super well here, even just that one bit.
Yeah, no, I agree. I really I like the stuff you're talking about with Nynaeve's and the conversation you have with the sea folk about the one is I really like it. I've always really liked the story in the book about Nynaeve not being able to sort of control or not being able to channel basically unless she's angry.
Mhm.
I really like it. I think it's very it's super because I do feel like I mean it's just the sense that the texts are so they're so long, there's so many books that it does feel like a thing that in a lot of uh some shorter stories like she would get past it a lot a lot quicker. Like it would be very quickly for her to figure it out, and it's not like it takes a long time for Nynaeve to like figure this out. And I quite like it. I've always liked that. And then yeah, I do like the Egwene, sorry, of like visiting all of these different moments in the dreams. I thought it was quite effective. Obviously, just ending with Rand and Lanfear as well. So yeah.
Mhm. So we also see Matt and Min on the boat. He finds that she's there, and he's like, I don't care. Just get me away from the vomiting." He finds the drawing of himself hanged. This is her vision. This is concerning. I like what they're doing with that relationship here, and for him to sort of vouch for Min with Nynaeve and Elaine at the end clearly meant a lot to her. So I thought that was cool. And she's now going to be like their guide in Tanchico.
I think maybe don't draw the image of your of Matt being hanged. Maybe though.
She's
Maybe
trying.
don't.
I think I can
Okay.
understand why,
All
right?
right.
Like if you see like a flash of a vision,
Oh,
you're like,
okay.
I need
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
try to write like remember as much as possible because there might be a detail.
Mhm.
But you know, I thought that was good. And then the sea folk themselves, the wind finders,
Yeah.
are certainly a thing that were in the books. And I will say, small nitpick here.
Mhm.
This is supposed to be a secret that they can channel. They're like, don't tell the tower that we can do this.
Yeah.
Um, and to keep this big secret from the tower, they were just like, yeah, just stay in your room. And then when they didn't, they were like, fine, we'll just channel in front of you. And pretty please don't tell the tower.
Yeah, this is there's another show that did this recently where I was like, oh man, I've been very hesitant. I feel like I got some feedback of like, you named too many other shows. I'm gonna do it anyway, which is the Acolyte. And the Acolyte recently did, one of the things that I was really excited about that show was that they were going to be like, here's a group of people who know about the Force, like it basically can like use the Force, but they don't call it the Force. Like they would have no reason to be like, this is the Force. I love that idea. This to me is quite similar in the sense that like, the way in which like the world just keeps expanding, something that Robert Jordan I think does like, I mean, he's an exceptional world builder. And so this idea that like, yeah, these people would like, not everyone would, the world is too big to just everyone fall in line with the one way in which people use it. So you have these people who are like exceptional sea travels, and one of the reasons they are is because of this. I totally agree with you. The like, we're a little like yada yadaing over the like some of the things that are probably important in the text that clearly they're not really whether it's a secret or not. It's a little silly, but I mostly don't mind it because I thought it looked really cool. So
It did. It looked really cool. So like this idea is, at least the way they're visualizing it in the show, is that it's like the Northern Lights basically.
Yeah.
And the idea is that like they're completely like untrained in the ways of like the One Power and the Aes Sedai, in the ways that they do it. And so like the idea is that it's like these much bigger, broader strokes. They can't do like the specifics of like what an Aes Sedai could do, but they know how to essentially just funnel wind into the sails, and it just makes them exceptional sailors. And so really cool stuff. We can turn this into a segment on the podcast, like Naked Watch. They are supposed to be bare chested,
Obviously.
the sea folk.
Why not?
So here's an instance of them not being naked like they are in the books. There you go. There's going to be more of that in this very this podcast.
So funny. Yeah. Yeah.
So we can just head straight into the other Naked Watch. Tell Aran Riyadh. Name of the episode. Egwene is going to learn how to enter the world of dreams. And she's going to be taught by the wise ones. They tell her, don't do this without us. And she's like, yes. And then immediately does. But they enter the world of dreams, and immediately her clothes change to armor because they're like, oh, you're looking for protection. She's like, oh, whoops. And then she changes back. Yep, this is another Naked Watch in the books. They're constantly just, oops, I'm naked. Oh, I didn't realize. Oh, man. Oh, I got to be paying attention to what I'm wearing, I guess. So there you go. There's another Naked Watch.
Yes, I know. I have no notes about Naked Watch. You're doing a tremendous job and a great service for all of us. But clearly you go back and read a lot of the Naked Watch scenes, Taran. That's how you're like, I know where they all are.
Really bothered me.
I again, in the way that I think that like this show, like where I think like, talking about the parent stuff, is that like they clearly didn't want to spend budget on a bunch of extras and to costume them all in white cloaks. They are doing, I think, that this scene, I think the CGI looks pretty cool when she like the armor looks super legit. I think. And then when
I will say the way I envisioned it was that it was instant. So it felt a little slow to me, but like it looked cool.
Can I say that I think that probably just looks a little like, I think that looks.
It probably would have looked very silly for it to be instant. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's like probably why I wonder whether they had made a decision about that, whether it's a sort of like, naturally changing or whether it's like a flash. But I think it looks very cool.
Well, so, you sort of see this in the world of dreams. Like later when there's the scene with Lanfear and Rand, there's like Lanfear is like approaching him and then she's there. Right. Like there's just like jump jumps, because you're in the world of
Dream.
dreams. Like that's sort of like what's supposed to happen there. Like things will just randomly change, and like all of a sudden things will be different. Like you can just believe that you're somewhere else, and then you're somewhere else. That's sort of how it's supposed to feel. Yeah.
I love the idea that, like, and this is from previous episode 2, I think, or maybe it is from this idea of, this is really cool world building in terms of not just dream walking, but this idea of like, you're the most powerful in your own dream is, I think, such a cool thing from Robert Jordan's work, in this idea of like, yes, you are. It's like the, it's very, the idea that she's sort of being um followed by land fear. It's this extremely, it's so horror movie done in the way that, like, there's a monster, but you just have to figure out what the trick of the like, it's like they can't be
Mhm.
in the sun, or they can't, whatever. And in this, it's like you have to like, you're the most powerful in your own dreams. That's what you need to be able
Tell
to
that to
do.
Freddy Krueger, man.
I know, brutal. But well, that one you just have can't fall asleep. That's it, right? So I just think it's like extremely cool. And then the way that, not only is she like, the way that we can then use it to get, I mean, there's a thing of like, sometimes like, ooh, it was all a dream, can like, it feels like it's cheating character growth, it's cheating character development, and it's not how I feel that the show does it at all, to the point that you can have Moraine be like, hey, I actually like really need, I need to use your, I think it's so cool, and it's very fun to see it come to life on TV.
Mhm. Yeah, it's a cool concept, and one that is I think fairly important. For we're already seeing its use, that Moraine is going to ask Egwene, like, "Can you help me communicate to someone?" And she's going to have a chance to go talk to Swan, in what I thought was a really good scene. I like you know, we talked about House of the Dragon season 2, and how, like, the ways in which they forced character interactions was really cringy at times.
Yes.
And I think that I was a little scarred from that. I got a little worried about this, but like it just worked in so many different ways.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, I did get the immense privilege to get to chat with Rosamund Pike again. Sorry, I say Rosamund. I believe it's Rosamund Pike, and that was very uh, laid into me before I went to speak with her again. Rosamund, but not for me directly, but everybody. But one thing I thought was really interesting that I asked her about the. I actually thought, you and I had a conversation earlier where when I was going to speak with Yash, I was thinking about this idea that, like, he represents something about the show that is an interesting metaphor to the character that he is, in terms of being the Dragon Reborn, and then being the character, the actor who plays the Dragon Reborn, and feeling like he could either break or save this thing. If it, like,
Mhm.
if Yasha is not, what people, if doesn't work as Rand, then the Wheel of Time as a adaptation kind of falls apart. And so then I found this idea of like, well, what about like the Sangreal, like the Sakarnan, like Moraine has to like sort of hold and protect it, and it wields immense power. And is that reflective of the way in which she is an executive producer and a star of the show? So that's kind of like how I asked the question. And she kind of went into this thing of like, I do feel very passionate about like responding to the fans. And I kind of talked about, I was like, I think you can like discredit people who are not acting in good faith, but there are people who just really want the show to succeed because they've loved it. And the one thing that was really interesting, she talked about this episode in particular, in season 1, she was mortified that people said that she would never wear her boots in bed. Do you remember this? Do you remember this controversy at all that was going on? They're like, I can't believe Moraine wore boots. And she was like, we were trying to establish that like sleep is a commodity that you have to be ready for, that you could be attacked at any time. And so Moraine wore her boots to bed. She goes, but if you'll notice, before I entered the dream, I did not wear my boots. like, like, thank you so much. But yeah, this scene is really good. I really love this scene with Swan.
Yeah, so Moraine has like a bit of a journey here. So in Ruidian, she sees her death essentially,
Yeah.
many times over and over. We saw that in episode 4. She ends up telling Lan, that basically in every future, either Rand fails
Yeah.
or she dies, one or the other.
Yeah.
And in order for Rand to succeed, she needs to have died. Uh, and um, and so she she's clearly got some ideas. She's testing out the Sukarnin, and it's pretty powerful thing. She nearly like burns herself out on it. So that's quite frankly, still don't even for sure know how that's going to play out. But she asks Egwene so that she can go talk to Swan because she has something very important to tell Swan. And it's not like, hey, I'm going to die, I need to say goodbye. It's there's another thing she saw that was in those futures, which is that the White Tower needs to bend the knee to Rand or he will lose the last battle. And this is very important because in the White Tower storyline, there's currently a conflict, and there's been a conflict at the White Tower. There was the conflict between Swan and Moraine in the first place, which is like, do you capture the dragon and guide him to what he needs to do, or do you bend the knee and allow him to take control? And Moraine is saying, like, I've seen it. I've literally seen it now. We need to bend the knee. And in the meantime, like, this is, I'm sure, convincing Swan to some degree. But in the meantime, Elida is in the White Tower, currently vying for power, vying for control of the White Tower, so that she can capture the dragon and wield him as a weapon. And so this is vital information.
Can I say, I think that the scene between Elida and Swan is also incredibly good. This is the way in which, like, it's the moment in a reality show where you're like, oh, they both know that they're scheming against each other, and they don't try to pretend that they kind of are not. It's
I could smell you before you walked in the door.
It's so good. I love it because it's like these two people who know that their cards can basically mostly be on the table because it's so obvious that they are against each other, but they don't quite know how to. They're each going to sort of like actually sort of quell the other's attempts at what they're doing. And so Swan sort of puts this like the secret plan in place leading up to the end of the scene at the end of the episode. And I just think it's like it's really, I'm really enjoying the White Tower in terms of the political dynamic of it all is I think extremely good, because it could be like, it could feel much more mustache twirly than it's not, and the fact that Elida is basically like sort of confronting Swan about sort of the ways in which things might end up happening. I just think it's great. It was really compelling.
Yeah, and so Elida wants to call a vote to essentially like, like, hey, I want my stuff to be done, and I'm questioning your leadership. And so the question obviously arises: there were Black Aja in the tower. There's at least one left that we don't know about. Is it Elida? Like, does she have an alternative agenda? They set up this plan to see what is she going to do if she finds out that we have Black Aja captured in this place. They plant the bait. She goes down there. She murders one of them, and then interrogates the other before a gray man comes and kills the other one before she can reveal the identity of the Black Aja member, and then attacks Elida when she's subsequently saved by Swan, and Swan's like, maybe I misjudged you, which, first of all, that would not have cleared Elida in my eyes. Like, that was still pretty close to her silencing those Black Aja women. I don't know about that.
This is exactly some Blood on the Clock Tower play where, like, I'm like, what I like, actually I think that person might be good. It turns like, no, you're Grace, like, you're not understanding. That actually means they're definitely, now I think you're both evil. That's exactly what happened, was me being like, Swan being like, actually I think she's pretty fine, and when I was like, no. Yeah.
Listen, it would have crossed my mind to be like, oh damn, we got here too late.
Yeah.
You're either Black Aja or you're a threat to me, and you're just getting attacked by this gray man. But it seems as though in Swan's eyes, this has cleared Elida from suspicion of being Black Aja, and I'm curious to see where it goes from there, because again, later in the episode, we learn from Moraine telling Swan that she needs to bend the knee to Rand, and so their views on this are extremely opposite. And so now that it seems as though she's not Black Aja, how do you reconcile? How do you deal with that moving forward? And that'll be, I think, an interesting thing to see moving forward.
I could use maybe like in the idea that you're saying that why not just like basically let the gray man kill Elida? There maybe does need, and it's probably like in there, and we're just feeling like it's not strong enough. But there probably needs to be something about how basically the more there's a thing. Correct me if I'm wrong, and I'm just am briefly doubting myself. But there's an idea that like the White Tower used to be like much fuller. There used to be a lot more Aes Sedai, and that actually like for a variety of reasons they're actually like a little they're stretched a little more thin. They've also just lost a bunch of powerful Aes Sedai that they had who are in the tower because they're actually Black Aja. And the idea that like I can sort of like interpret this of like the reason why you don't let Elida die is that like if she's not Black Aja, you actually do need you need any reinforcements you can have. But I think probably that's not strong enough. It's not like conveyed well enough in the show probably.
I mean, I think it is. I think that like it would have crossed my mind. Would have actually let the gray man kill Elida? Probably not. But you would have thought about it, right?
And maybe she'll say it in a future episode, and then we, what do we know?
I also, while we're talking about Elida, I want to bring up there's an interview she did with Collider, I believe, where Shora talked about playing Elida and how basically this came about because of her role on The Expanse, was just a phenomenal role and on a phenomenal show. And I just thought it was so adorable. She was like, it was incredible. I've worked in Hollywood for 50 years. Nothing like that had ever happened to me before. As soon as I was done with The Expanse, the fans of The Expanse and those who liked my work on The Expanse started saying, we need to find her another TV series because we want to see her at work. I thought, oh my God, I'm at home. I'm no longer that strange actor coming from the other half of the world. I'm at home with them, with my family who want to see me again, who want me to keep working. I was so surprised and shocked. And essentially the fans were like, hey, she should be on the Wheel of Time. And that's basically how she got this role. And I just thought it was so adorable. I loved this interview and the story.
I love that. She's great. She's really good. Yeah.
So ultimately, again, Moiraine talks to Swan. Very emotional conversation. They sort of talk about how things have been kind of ruined by Swan when she was being such a jerk at the end of season 2. And what I thought was really interesting about this conversation is earlier in the episode, you see Elida saying, like, I remember when Moiraine was around and you were like a lovesick puppy. And you see that. Like, this is a side to Swan that you don't really ever see when she's around other people, which is like, she's like, I'll wait for you. Like, she's like, she very much is like, I'm sorry, like, take me back. And like, you're the strong one, Moiraine. And I just love that they are allowing her to have that like depth to her character, that she doesn't have to be like the Amerlin seat Swan all the time, or even like the, hey, I'm chill, I'm I'm going to talk about fishing stuff all the time. Like, there are depths to this character that exist. And I thought it was a really, really touching scene that worked really well and played into this, like, hey, I'll wait for you in another life.
Well, the piece I feel like I'm like beating a dead horse here, but the themes of that I'm talking about is you can't have that doesn't work if you don't know what that person is giving up to fulfill the duty that they are or the responsibility of what they're trying to actually accomplish. And so Moiraine and Swan are both giving up basically this scene. This is like if they weren't having to literally figure out how to save the world from being destroyed, then this is what their life could be like. But they have both put themselves in positions because they're the people that can do that, where they have to give up these moments. They can only ever have this in a dream. They can't, it's not even that they actually get it, but not really, and so I agree that Swan is somebody who I literally like these scenes because it does give us insight into this thing that is about her character's responsibility and what she's giving up to be able to try to protect the White Tower and protect the world.
And then in the meantime, Egwene goes off. She's been attacked by Lanfear previously, in Taran and but now she is visiting her friends in their dreams. We already talked about Nynaeve, which I thought was great, and these dreams I thought were just spectacular
Yeah, I agree.
in
Hmm.
terms of like what they were able to touch on and speak to in terms of the character. Nynaeve with her daughter from the Arches, Matt with his mom, who we know has just died, and then Perrin with Hopper was so
Yeah,
cute.
yeah.
I saw some people be like really Perrin Fail already, but it's like chill. It's his dream.
It's his
People
dream.
dream
Yeah.
about things all the time. It's like he's not responsible for this. It's not like he's controlling the dream. Like you don't know what's gonna happen in the dream. Come on.
That's also so
He
that actually is maybe the most like book thing is that they're just like instantly are like,
It really
this
is.
idea of like, all right, I like it. Maybe I
He
don't know how
just
to talk to her and I'm just gonna have this dream of her, Yeah.
he just met this cute girl that it turns out she's a super badass also and just saved his life, and he can't have a dream where she's like working the blacksmithery with him. Like, come on.
Yeah. Yeah. So good.
So that was fun. And then of course Egwene is gonna run into Rand and Lanfear. This tested my ability to accept it, because I am hugely not a fan of the extremely prevalent trope of somebody overhearing,
Yeah.
oh, they're kissing another, like at
Yeah.
just the wrong time they show up. Or like, cut away, oh, that person's been listening the whole time, oh my god, now this is going to be so much wrong. It happens so much. It's such an overused trope.
Yeah.
This kind of works, I think, because I think it was set up decently. The world of the dreams, that this has been happening, before she's being attacked in the dreams. I think it's set up well enough that I'm not like super mad at it. But it definitely, like the second she visited somebody else's dream, I was like, oh, I see what's happening. Am I annoyed by this? I'm kind of annoyed by this. It kind of works, So that was kind of
Yeah.
my reaction.
Yeah, I think there's a way you can do this slightly different where I feel like if the idea is like Lanfear has been sort of like onto like that she's able to like the idea that like Lanfear could have a better sense that like Egwene's there and then actually like be like, and now I'm going to show you what you like, your sort of worst fear at the moment. I think that that could work a little stronger. But I guess if we're trying to set up that like Egwene is sort of, she's not only can she do this, but that she's pretty good at it. Like that's sort of dream walking that is, then it's fun. I don't know that I was really bothered by it, but as soon as I hear you talking about it, I'm like, yeah, that is a little silly, but it didn't bother me
I
as I was watching it.
I
So
kind of agree. I think if Lanfear had like made this happen on purpose, that
yeah,
would have felt better to me. But
yeah,
because like what I will say is that Lanfear and the pretty clear sort of, it's you never really know what's genuine with Lanfear, because like
mhm,
she's clearly manipulating Rand to some degree. Like she's not exactly being like, yeah, I'm also torturing your girlfriend.
that's right.
So like, I doubt he would enjoy
Well,
learning about that.
I never tell people that I'm torturing their significant partners when I'm interacting. I never tell, and I'm doing it, but I don't tell them.
Yeah, of course
That's
not.
taboo.
Um, um, so like I guess what I'm trying to say is that like this is working better for me than what they did in the books, which is not hard to do because I really did not like Lanfear's introduction in the books. Basically, like she's introduced as a different character, and this is like past events. Like this is not spoil. This is like what happened a few books ago in the books. Is that she's introduced as
We
this like other.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, we get a version of it, so, but like there is a lot of the Forsaken are like we're actually this person, but then actually we're this. That's a lot. That's the thing he really likes to use. We do get it, don't we? Don't we get in the show a little bit of like, not that she
Her
looks
as
like
like the
her,
innkeeper, but like
yeah, but not like I'm this totally other
in the
different.
books she shows up as like this perfect ingenue, like that like needs to be and she's like the most beautiful person you've ever seen, and she's so innocent and
Yeah,
kind, and
right, right.
like I thought it worked a lot better like the way that they introduced it in the show. But like it was never remotely believable that like Rand would have any kind of inclination toward Lanfear in the books to me.
Yes. Yes.
Whereas in the show, like you're still like, dude, really? But at the same time, it's a little bit of like, I can see it though. I can see it. He thinks he can change her. You know what I mean? Like, and she's very compelling and very powerful, and like she's manipulating him. You're still pretty annoyed at Rand, which is very true to how you will feel about him in the books. But you know, I think it's a lot more compelling and understandable than I think this
Yeah.
ish plot in the books.
Well, the other piece to it that when I was like, I had the thing I was saying earlier about talking to Yasha and being like, and the Dragon Reborn is destined to save the world. And then actually it was Rosman who like interrupted, was like, sorry, it's like save the world or destroy the world. And I was like, oh, that's even actually better for my metaphor, you know, but whatever. And I think that to me, that's what works about, that's actually what works about it being like I think the relationship between Rand and Lanfear in the show is that part of it is not just like that it plays into all the stuff about like men who channel go crazy and like all of that stuff, and like the fact that he is sort of interested in this person who is like much more dangerous than like Egwene. Egwene is, for all we see in the show, like is a good person, you know, is like is trying to work. Rand, on the other hand, has like there is the idea that maybe he's not destined to save the world, that maybe he's destined to go mad and destroy the world. And so I think that like this version of Lanfear and their relationship, I think I can see that in it. And yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So the only other thing from the episode for me is we get a little bit of Avienda now as like a wise one in training, and she looks completely different, like totally new look for Avienda,
Yeah.
and she's very grumpy about this because she is a maiden of the spear. That's how she feels, like she identifies herself. But she's being told by the wise ones, like, you need, like, it's your fault that Rand doesn't know about the Aiel ways and that you need to be teaching him. And she's like, well, he doesn't want to be taught. And then we see her give some attempts later on. It's very fun.
Yeah, it is. It is very fun. I like the Sabienda. Feel like she's been a little bit like she's like on the show, obviously, but it feels like now like on the show, you know?
Yeah. Anything else before we talk more spoileriness?
The only one thing is the little kid who says Rand al'Thor's name fully every time is my favorite thing on the show. It's like, yes, you Rand al'Thor. Like every time, full name is my favorite. This little
and I liked also how like she was like, "Are you the Dragon Reborn?" And then he shows her the tattoos, and she kind of recoils in fear a little bit at first because this is not a chosen one savior story. This is he is going to, especially for the Aiel, he is going to break you story. So the Karakarn is not somebody to be sort of revered and praised. It's somebody you kind of got to be a little bit scared of if you're Aiel.
Just the little accent saying Rand al'Thor's name every time in full. I like it a lot.
All right, well, that is the end of the non-spoiler portion. We will now talk a bit more about future-y stuff from the books. I don't think there's anything too deep here for future spoilers, but be warned. We will be talking a bit about that. There's really not a ton here either. I think that that we're going to be discussing. But now is your chance to bounce out, and we'll be back next week to talk about episode 6 and check out all the other stuff we're doing, like the tastemakers and all that good stuff.
Yeah.
Okay. Spoilers happening now. Grace, it's fitting that you ended on the little girl because there is a bit of a theory going around, and I think it tracks that this little girl might end up in Tyr. And that Rand may end up trying very hard to resurrect her.
Could be. Yeah, that would make sense. Yeah. Which would be very sad for me. I don't want to see that, actually. So
it could be a very powerful scene if they build up this child, because in the books it's kind of just like a random kid, I think, to my memory.
Yeah. So that's a good, I think that makes a lot of, I think that makes sense. It makes more sense than just being like, oh, it's some other kid established.
Well, I mean, like
early on.
I think there's certainly reason to believe that they might not include the scene at all. But like, for me, it's one of the more. It's honestly one of the most memorable scenes from that book. In my memory of it, it was so sort of powerful to me. This idea of like having so much power and still not being able to do what you want. I think it is pretty important to Rand's character and sort of like more of the themes of the story. And so to give him an attachment to the kid, I think will help us as the audience care more about the results and really just add to a scene that that potentially will come. Um,
Yeah.
Will it come this season? I don't think they're going to tier this season. We only have 3 episodes left, but I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know when they're gonna put yeah, because we've talked about this in case you're like, if you're here and you're not about, like, they've swapped the sword because he goes to tier first and pulls out the sword, but then he just like puts it back and leaves. So he's like fulfills that prophecy. And so like it makes so much sense to just like swap them if they've like, they have to do that at some point, but how they do that, I don't know. So I also don't think we're going to tier by the end of this season. There's not enough time, I think. But I
Mhm.
do agree that it'd be part. I think it's this thing of that moment for me, really sort of like, one of the things that's really tough about these types of stories is like the chosen one aspect. And so the idea that like this thing of like what actually can't he do, even if he is as powerful as he is, I think is actually super important. So I think we'll get it. It just, yeah, might not happen this season.
I think there's a really cool way to do it too, where like as the chosen one with this new powerful artifact that you just spent a lot of time winning, so much power, like a lot of stories would then have that succeed, and you can play into the tropes of how that's portrayed in a show where it's like, oh, she's dead, but she's not really dead, right? Like and then, oh look, yeah, look, he's gonna use the sword to revive, like, and to play into that and play the beats and the rhythm of how that scene would play out only to have him fail. I think it would be very, like, when you play around with stuff like that, it can be very upsetting for viewers, but I think that would work really well. One of the classics for me is back when I thought Dan and Dave working on Game of Thrones were really good at what they did. Was a scene with Tyrion in some dungeons and a
Mm.
speech that was given to him, and how that followed the story beats of a thing in particular, and then instead crushed watermelon. So uh, I think that's there's a lot of potential there, and I think that's a scene that they can do really well because it doesn't involve a bunch of people. So I'm hopeful for that. Very clearly to me, there was some talk about like with Avienda and Elaine, like getting busy. Oh, I forgot to mention Elaine in the dream sequence as well, being a wind finder and then having Avienda show up. For a second, I was like, is Avienda dreamwalking into Elaine's dream? But I think
Mm.
that was just an Elaine fabrication.
Yeah.
Um, but very clearly to me, we are now setting up this concept of like a poly kind of relationship deal
Yeah.
in the with the Aiel, and what does that I think, and then specifically, Avienda asks Rand like, "Oh, wetlanders don't share lovers. Oh, what a shame for Egwene." And
So
so,
yeah,
yeah,
I
we're
did
getting there
some
for sure.
I did some very careful reading because I'm not, as I said, I'm not like I haven't read everything, but I know that this is sort of a thing that we move towards is Rand having many romantic partnerships, and then sort of like, yeah, there's sort of like a sister wives thing that's going on, and I tried to find some stuff that I felt I could read because I wanted to understand why people who think it's important that it still happens, why it happens. And the best thing that I saw was that the way in which these different so first of all, one thing that's like super important to clarify is that it's literally in here mostly because Robert Jordan was in a polyamorous relationship. so so it was like him like articulating that through the main character of his book. So that's why it's in there. And I still think you can make an argument that like you don't need it to be like he's in all these relationships at the same time for it to work. But one of the things that people talk about is the way in which like each of the people he's going to be romantically connected to being a different part of Rand that gets reflected in the story. And so like there's some argument that like Robert Jordan thought that was especially important to do romantically and not just like people in his life, because they end up becoming the most important things. He does obviously have all the, like he has Moraine and he has Nynaeve. Like there are other women in his life who he is not romantically interested with, but these relationships are important in the sense that there's an argument that like you could do them at different times. Like you could be with these different people at different times, but that's not what the thing does. And I think you're absolutely right that like we're definitely heading towards that. I think it'd be really interesting to see. I mean, we get this. We introduce it obviously with when the chief comes home and introduces his wives. I haven't really seen much, but it'd be interesting to see how it's sort of like received from a more casual like fan view for sort of like one of the main protagonists of the show to have something like that. But I mean, there's other shows that are doing some pretty wild stuff on television, Taran, and people seem pretty okay with it. So I think polyamory is probably people will be fine.
I mean, to me, Rand's relationships were never very compelling. Like, and maybe part of that, especially when I was a kid, was the fact that he had multiple relationships like at the same time. Was like it just kind of almost felt arbitrary to me at times. Like this one is a friend, but this one is a lover, I guess.
Yeah.
Like it because it didn't like the lover aspect of it really didn't really come into play much. Like it really didn't matter all that much. And so it was one of the things that didn't ever quite work for me. I liked his individual relationships with each of the women, but like it didn't feel like it was a necessary part of the story for them to be romantically involved. And even the fact that there were three of them didn't really come up or matter in any significant way. They were just like, oh yeah, I guess we'll share. And obviously there was like a relationship between Elaine and Avienda, but like again, not in a way that where it felt like it was significant or mattered to any significant degree that they then became like sister wivesy kind of situations. So if anything, it just kind of felt like depending on where Rand is and what he's doing, he needs his like love interest to be there to like to do and it couldn't be the same person every time, and he needs different things from different people at different times, and so that's kind of why he ends up with three different women. So
and because Robert Jordan was in a polyamorous relationship.
I honestly didn't know that.
Yeah, explains a lot, huh?
Kind of. I think the question for me is like, are we going to get Min involved here at any point? Because feels real far removed from the whole situation. Basically has zero relationship with Rand at this point. And if we are, approaching the halfway point in the series, like, when is Min going to? And maybe there, I do not believe that they would remove Min from this equation. Or you know what? Maybe like Min and Elaine right now will start to develop a little bit of something, a little bit of rapport, and that will be sort of an in for that. But I've seen a lot of people like, are they trying to set up Min and Matt? And I think there's absolutely no chance of that happening. Personally,
I think you can actually set up Min and Rand via Matt. The fact that like you have the vision step, but Rand isn't, like Matt isn't where he is for that thing to have happened. And however we're going to figure that out, I feel like there's a world where you can figure out how to get Min connected to Rand like via that. I think is like a little bit where I'm headed. I mean, my complaint about like the romantic interest stuff is more so this idea that like as much as it's the chosen one trip, like to me this is, again, it's a very like female powered show, and yet there is this like male chosen one, and the fact that it was like so much just like everybody just seemed to like, it's not that they like grow like fondness for him, it's like there's an immediate like I am in love with him, which I think already the show is doing a better job of that. Even Avienda and Rand having like a
The whole like
connection.
letters thing with Elaine, it's just so tedious.
Yes. So, and they cut out the like very like the very first scene where Rand and Elaine meet each other, where he sort of like stumbles into the palace, right? Isn't that their first? I believe
Oh
that's
yeah,
their
yeah.
first interaction, which feels much more like schoolboy, like it feels like a little, more rom-commy than anything. But I think that they've done a better job, even though Avienda and Rand has that same. It still has a little bit of that like same teasing energy, but it's not quite as like over the top as I feel like it can be in the books. So I'm mostly, I think, fine with how they're sort of depicting everything, even if it's like it's a change I would have made. It's really interesting that in a show where they have made a lot of changes, that they seem to not be changing. That to me is pretty interesting, and in particular I'd love to know at some point why like Rafe has decided to to likely keep it that way. So
I think it's hard to remove that part. For as much as like the book readers bemoan many of the big changes, I think that like the show has really kept with many of the major beats, and that to me, despite it feeling arbitrary, is still a major beat, I think, from the story.
so
Um,
where I'm at in the books too is like I feel like a little bit like I was fully in on the like, oh, Gwen and Rand are meant to be together thing, and basically this episode we get sort of the first introduction to like how that potentially does not end up being the case. And I'm in the book. I have a hard time with like where they send Egwene off to in a way that also I think feels very very rushed. So it'll be interesting to see how that comes together as
yeah, I
well.
mean, it
But
never made sense to me in the books that they were just like, yeah, we're just. Never mind. Essentially.
yeah,
Uh,
I think this is really good of like the like, oh, you're in love with the Forsaken, bro. Like, no, thank you. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I do think so. This is a little bit of an interesting choice to me. This idea of like Rand essentially getting caught cheating. Like,
Right.
I don't think that like really uh, gets the audience on Rand's side here. Like he looks like a big jerk right now, and that like as I mentioned in the non spoiler portion is very true to the books. Like this is we're firmly in like Darth Rand territory, I guess. But it does feel like I think the show will need to win viewers back over to Rand, um, because I think a lot of people will feel very upset about him doing this to Egwene, who is a very popular character, rightfully so. Um, and like he's very obvious. Like I think while I did mention like it feels like it's more justified than it is in the books, but like it's very obviously being manipulated, and the fact that he's not only falling for it but betraying Egwene in a spot where she's been so vigilant and like by his side and has done nothing wrong, and if anything has been tortured by multiple people now, one of which is the person manipulating it. Like it really makes Rand look like a chump. And how are they going to redeem him? I think in for this in particular
Yeah.
is a thing I'm interested in.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about one thing I would love to is like we talked praise the Elida Swan stuff. I feel like that I think that this stuff has been very good and it's very exciting. You imagine by the end of the season we get
In
a conclusion
in
to
my
that.
mind, at the end of the season, Swan is deposed and stilled.
It's going to be tough.
If not killed, like
Oh
but
wow.
I imagine probably stilled.
Yeah, that's the thing. I'm like, I think it's like it will be a very powerful moment. I've really like Sophia Kendo, I think is her name, is how she who plays Swan. I think she's really good, and I think that like giving her that that material for a season 4, I think I would be intrigued,
Like when
intrigued
I
by
talked
that.
about her conversation with Moraine and how she like feels more like a lovesick puppy, and a bit more of like a like please forgive me kind of thing. Like that is the sign of the side of Swan that we see after she's stilled.
Right.
And the fact
Right.
that we're seeing it now tells
Yeah.
me that like that she's not only capable of playing it, but that like this is something that they're already playing around with in terms of like, yeah, we can see that version of her, and maybe soon. Um, So yeah, I mean that's another like big moment in the books for me that's like really gets you going because the bad guys win. And it
Yeah.
makes you really frustrated.
Do you think there's anything to the way in which that because of the scene they did to open the season that it takes away from the because like that is sort of where like they leave, she sends off people to go find them because all these Black Aja have left. We don't get this like fight. Do you think it takes away at all from like what's coming, or do you think people will be more surprised that now something like if you're like not really a book reader that something else is like that will happen presumably by the end of the season?
I
I'm of
mean,
two minds about that.
I feel like it has to be by the end of the season because of just the way that it's being set up.
It's pretty central
Um,
here in this season.
yeah, like what is the climax of the White Tower storyline right now, if not for her being deposed? Um, and but I don't think it needs to feel similar to the opening though. Like I think that it can be more pared down. It doesn't need to be like the big like civil.
Right.
I mean, it kind of does, but like, I don't know. I don't think it needs to be. I don't think like um, I think there's a way that you can do this that feels distinct for sure.
Yeah, I think it
Uh,
has to be able to sync. I also think like even if it's not the fact that like I don't think it's going to be big. I don't think there's going to be a lot of like magic. I think it's because the moment's going to happen and this is the coup. But I think it's interesting to think of like that people might not expect it because we got this like not from book
mm,
readers but from more people who are casual of like we're not going to get another thing in the White Tower. That happened at the beginning of the season, and I think the idea that it's been so front and center, like the fact that they're basically talking at each other about the conflict that they have, I think it means people could be quite surprised by there. So the rumor, Taran, is that there's like another episode that's coming this season, and the rumor is episode 7 is a rumor that like I think Rafe has said that's the next big episode. So I don't. Do you have thoughts on what maybe that like?
I mean, in terms of what's coming, I think for me, if they're not doing tier yet, then the White Tower coup is like the biggest thing. Granted, like the stuff happening in the Two Rivers could also be really big. It is in the books, but like in terms of them pulling it off, like again, like that's sort of what I was trying to get at in the non-spoiler section was like, if this is how they were able to handle like the rescue scene,
Yeah.
what is like the battle stuff gonna look like what is the bigger stuff here gonna look like?
Yeah, I guess if my point
um
was like, oh, they didn't want to like get a bunch of extras and be like put them in costumes, but they're gonna have to have the costuming for like an eventual battle, then why didn't they just have, yeah, I don't know.
yeah. So I'm definitely a little worried about that. So I would imagine that the White Tower stuff is going to be the biggest climax. But again, we're really like I think spiraling also toward Moraine and Lanfear showdown. I think that Moraine battling Lanfear with the Shakarnan, or Sakarnan, I think
Yeah.
that could make some sense to me. And then especially because they've gone in so hard on Lanfear, like for them to both potentially, uh, get sucked away, it could make a ton of sense. So I think that
Mhm.
there's potentially something there.
Rosamund talked
Um,
about this, and she talked about actually specifically in a question about what excites her about being an executive producer. She talked about specifically the moment where she's sort of like resigned to essentially having to die because of what she's seen that the Dragon Reborn needs to die for the Dragon Reborn to be successful. She talks about like she got to help with the music cues of that moment. She had to say it had to feel like that feeling of like knowing that she was resigned to that choice. She's basically been given her death sentence. And so she's pretty explicit about that because she's like, Rain has to die for Rand to.
well,
So
it's also like
yeah,
to your point when you were asking this question, it's like it's another like mirroring of her as an actor on the show. Like
hundred percent,
I have to resign myself to the fact that in order for this show to succeed, I'm going to need to step away.
very fun, right?
Um, but so yeah, that could happen. My hope is that my memory of reading the White Tower like coup in the books is that like you sort of see it coming, but you don't see it succeeding coming. if that makes sense.
Right.
And so my hope is that what they're trying to do with Elida right now is is she Black Aja, which is always a central point in the books. Like, is she Black Aja or is she just an idiot? Not an idiot, but like, is she just like misguided? And my hope is that now that they've like seemingly cleared Elida from being Black Aja, now there's going to be like this attempt made to be like, okay, you're actually on our side. Here's the thing: we need to work with the dragon, and then Elida is gonna like come around, but it's gonna be a fake coming around, and we're not gonna see
Right.
it. We're gonna think this is like enemies to lovers, and then she's gonna turn around and it's gonna be no, enemies to even more enemies, and we're gonna be blindsided by the vote at tribal. And so that's what I'm hoping for, because the gut punch of this working, I think, was huge to me in the books.
Same, and I think it's a thing. It's a thing that we haven't seen on the show that we get to play with in the world of like an Aes Sedai, no longer like a magic user no longer having magic, and what that means. And I really don't. I would be pretty devastated if they change this whole thing and Swan dies. I would be pretty.
Yeah, I saw some people saying that. I don't think it makes sense, because like does she have like a huge role in the story after this? Like, no, but she does have a role, and I think that they've already invested a lot in this actor, and I think that there's definitely some important things. We still haven't really properly seen like a stilled person, and she really represents that for a good portion of the story. So
We haven't seen a
um
stilled woman, right? Because we have
you
the
right, Logain.
yeah, Logan.
Is it called stilling if it's a man?
I don't know.
I feel like it's something else, um
Can I
but
say
yeah.
one last? It was I was very happy to get to ask Moraine if she knew that her desert sun hat has become quite iconic, and she said, "Oh, that's very good to know. I was worried that people thought it was going to be too desert chic." And she said, "And now I'm sad I didn't take the hat home with me." So that hat is somewhere out there. Also, this is very cool. Someone sent her a pair of earrings that she wore in season 2, and she doesn't think that the woman who made the earrings knows that she actually like snuck them into the show. And I just think that's so
Oh,
cute. That's how much she, you know, the show means to people. She's
yeah.
wore this person's earrings that she custom made for Rosamund Pike for Moraine to wear.
Mhm.
So yeah.
One thing that I noticed watching myself, and I've certainly seen a lot of, is that like, this was our proper introduction to Teleron Riyadh, and we even visit Perrin's dream with Hopper there. He does not seem to notice Egwene, and does not seem to have any show connection to the dream world. Um, this is obviously a big part of his storyline, but I could, it would not be impossible to cut out the dream stuff for Perrin, but it would certainly feel difficult. I mean, it's his dream world storyline is very, I would say, convoluted feeling. It is a little like tricky to portray. His story has generally been tricky to portray for the show, because wolves are really hard for them to get right visually, and he's part of all these battles that they're not really able to show very well. They've clearly invested a lot in like the magic visuals, which are great, but they don't, other than the eyes, which are working really well. They don't seem to know how to visually portray Perrin's storyline. So in some ways, the dream world might be a great way for them to show some of his like magical abilities. But on the other hand, it is still kind of complicated the ways in which he navigates the dream world, especially with the wolves and stuff. So I don't know. It's a little weird that we didn't even get a hint of him being a little more aware of Egwene than some of the others, perhaps, or anything like that.
Yeah, that is interesting. I always felt like Perrin's stories of the end, I was like, oh, sweet. And then the more that they do, I'm like, oh, okay. It's like they don't like, I don't know. That's just where I am in the books. Again, it could
Perrin
get
starts
like,
strong and really whimpers out, I think, in terms of his arcs.
yeah, that's sort of been my feeling through book 6, I think. So yeah. And then
I
it's
think
kind of unfortunate they like then are gonna like take it. But I also think that there's a way in which you know, as much as we could talk about like there's like themes that pass over, the idea that like two people can do this, like if you already maybe they don't want it, they want to be like this is a Egwene's thing, you know, this is
Mhm.
not Perrin's thing, which is maybe a little too bad for Perrin because it's
They
but
d they
yeah,
did set up that you don't need to be a channeler to do it though.
that's
So
true.
that
Yeah,
that could imply that they will get there eventually.
yeah,
This is I would say like light light spoilers for like deep stuff, but like I think one of the classic takes is that Robert Jordan really like knew how to write Matt and didn't quite get Perrin. And then when Brandon Sanderson took over, he really got Perrin and gave Perrin a great kind of conclusion, but didn't quite know how to write Matt.
interesting.
And so that's sort of a thing I've definitely seen, and I definitely agree that like Sanderson had a good grasp of Perrin, and wasn't quite there with Matt, but that's something. But so yeah, interesting for Perrin there. I feel like we'll get there eventually, but it was a little weird that we didn't see a hint of it here, especially because again, I feel like Perrin is just continuing to be a little bit underdeveloped in the show.
It's funny because that's such a thing you can easily just give to the. I mean, I guess if you're not gonna do it, then you don't want to do it. But if you are even toying with the idea of doing it, the fact that you can't just get like Perrin looking and making eye contact, and that'd be like something that's like, oh, like you know, to give it like that's exactly the type of thing that you can like put in without giving, you know, you don't have to do a whole thing. It's gonna be one small moment that I think
Um,
book readers would be like, duh, there it is. Like, there's a thing. That's a thing I can, you know. But if they're not going to do it, I guess I don't want to set up any expectation. But
yeah. All right. Anything else,
no,
Grace?
I don't think so. I think we covered a fair bit.
Okay. Well, we will be back then for next week. I think for me this was. I don't know if it was the weakest episode of the season because I think episode one also had some bits that I was less impressed by. But again, like that's not say like it doesn't mean I'm down on it. I'm still
Yeah.
enjoying and looking forward to watching this show more than most shows generally. Like
Yep.
again, this was a long episode, and multiple times throughout the episode I was like, I hope there's more time. I hope there's more of it. I just want more of this. I'm never bored watching the show. I'm just sometimes like, ugh, I wish that could have been better, but I just always want more. So I think that's a very difficult thing to achieve, especially for me and how many shows I watch.
Yeah.
So definitely looking forward to more, even though I had some issues with this one.
Yeah. I think that's totally fair. I think the more we talked, this is one, the more we talked about it, the more I was like, oh, yeah, I definitely see those themes. While I was watching it, I wasn't feeling them as much, which is probably, this can be both a good thing and a bad thing. But yeah, I had fun chatting through it with you, Taryn, and appreciate people
All
who are
right.
listening.
Well, that's what we have for you now. Stay tuned for next week. We'll also be talking on the Tastemakers about all the other shows going on right now. So stay tuned for that. And we've also got some other coverage coming up soon. Last of Us is coming soon. Then Andor. So we're gonna have some preview podcasts for those. If you've heard of them, not sure if you want to check them out. Check out our preview pods. We give you a little bit of a rundown on why you should watch them. Yeah, that's what we got going on. Anything
Yeah.
else to plug, Grace?
No, my interview with Rosman is on parade.com. You can go check that out.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for joining us here today, and we will see all of you next time.